introduce Keri Batchelder, who is from CDHS. She's the two-generation manager of the Office of Early Childhood. And she is going to start off with just an overview of two-generation coaches.
So, good afternoon. Thanks so much for being here. I know it's summertime and there's lots going on, so we really appreciate your commitment to coming. And we've been planning this for quite a while now, so I think we're excited to finally be here and be providing this workshop for you. So I want to just sort of introduce myself in my role first. So as Heather mentioned, my name is Keri Batchelder. I'm the two-generation manager for the Department of Human Services. And I always kind of say that the manager title is a little bit of a misnomer. I'm not actually managing any particular program, but really I like to think of myself more as a coordinator, and a coordinator between our more child-focused programs and our adult-focused programs. So my position really sits across the whole department, sort of an umbrella position where I get to work with all our different programmatic areas, and really, again, ensure that our child-focused programs are connecting to our adult-focused programs, that they're forming partnerships and aligning systems, and just really an effort to really integrate our child and adult serving program areas. And so I serve as a resource to do that, a connection to other resources, just a facilitator of those conversations and partnerships. So that's my role at the Department of Human Services. So I want to start really with, well first actually, let me just show of hands, how many of you are sort of familiar with the two-generation language, concepts, those kinds of things? Okay, so a good portion, great. I should mention and give kind of a shout out to Ascend at the Aspen Institute, because they are the ones that are primarily responsible for a lot of the visuals and thinking and information that I'll be presenting to you today. They are, if you haven't heard of them, they are a policy program that's centered on two-generation approaches, some kind of a national hub for breakthrough ideas and collaborations related to this approach, and they're in Washington, D.C., out of D.C., so just a shout out to them. But I wanted to start with, really why a two-generation approach, and probably even more particular, kind of why a two-generation approach for our department. And that really for us comes down to the fact that the U.S. of the 21st century looks really different from the U.S. of the 20th century, right? The demographics are changing. We are, going to be a majority-minority nation in the next 30 years. The economy is shifting, particularly in the number of women, especially mothers who are in the workforce. Family structure is changing, right? We have more single parents, again, particularly women, than ever before. And then also, this a changing landscape of technology that we're living in as well. So, all of those things, I think, really, set the context for this newer approach. And one thing actually that was an example that was just given to me recently was the child support system, and how that child support system was really built when intact families became intact, in the structure and the context of, having intact families who then became intact, who became not intact. And so, not in this world of parents and families that are never sort of intact families, that never married, or, those kinds of things. So, and we're trying to kind of now retrofit this child support system that was created in this one context to this newer context, and it's not necessarily doing so very successfully. So, most of our social programs, that one included, have really been built on the definition of what the country looked like decades ago, demographically, economically, in terms of two-parent married families, limited technology, all of those things. And so when you take a closer look at some of these shifts in the national context, and then you add to that the sort of growing skills and education that the economy now demands, it really underscores the fact that it's imperative to change the ways in which we're helping families succeed. So if we really want to move families beyond poverty, and not just sort of an acute rise from poverty and then, they kind of cycle back in to poverty, but really sustain them beyond poverty across generations in this new sort of 21st century context, then we have to change the way that we do business. And so the two-generation framework, it really gives us that new lens, or newer lens, I should say, because as I'll share in a little bit, it's not, entirely new, through which to better serve families in this new 21st century context. So whereas previously we conducted a lot of individual assessments, we're very client-focused, whether the identified client was the child or the adult, we gave that identified client services and supports. The two-generation lens really means assessing the whole family, right? Both the child and the parent at the same time, and providing services and supports simultaneously. So for instance, while dad is, getting an education at the local voc tech school, or while mom is working, the provision of childcare becomes an early learning opportunity, not just a work support strategy so that mom can continue to work or dad can continue to go to school. Providing that sort of simultaneous high-quality childcare services is really an investment in that child to position them to stay beyond poverty across generations as well. So what we know about returns on investment, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, is that high-quality early education can produce a return as high as 7 to 10%, and that parents' educational attainment is the best predictor of economic mobility. So really anything that we can do to support both of these things simultaneously really maximizes their impact. Another example, parent participants in a post-secondary education program, they have shared that they are more involved with their children's learning as a result of their participation in their own education, right? And so that mutual sort of motivation suggests that the benefits of a two-generation program is really about sort of the sum of their individual parts, not about the individual services and supports, but really that sum of those services and supports. And what I really appreciate about the two-generation lens is also that it recognizes that moving beyond poverty is really a journey. That it's not simply, you get a job and now you're no longer in poverty, right? I mean, for a lot of people, it's about getting a job, getting maybe another job, having some economic supports for a period of time until their circumstances really begin to improve. And that there's also not one sort of cure-all component. It's not just early child care, it's not just economic supports, it's not just education and employment, but it's all of those things within sort of this larger strategy that really moves individuals and families beyond poverty. So the need that we're really addressing with the two-generation framework is that, either the child or the parent is oftentimes left behind, and the family's chance of success really reduced when fragmented policies and programs are utilized to address the needs of children and parents separately. Placing parents and children in silos really ignores the daily challenges that are faced by parents who are working or studying while raising a child. And this is a challenge that's even more pronounced for those who are working for lower wages. So the solution being policies and programs that address the needs of children and their parents together, which better harnesses the family's full potential and really puts the entire family on a path to more permanent economic security. Providing opportunities for children and their parents together is really a more efficient approach and creates a greater potential return on investment, again, by maximizing that impact, as I said earlier, in families, and really streamlines the system that is serving them. So that solution really leads us into sort of the working definition of a two-generation approach, which is that two-generation approaches provide opportunities for and meet the needs of children and their parents together. And what you'll probably notice as well is that the parent-child relationship is really at the core of two-generation approaches. And I love this visual in particular because I think it's really helpful to programs in terms of thinking about sort of where they are at on the continuum. So obviously you have your solely child-focused programs, your solely parent-focused programs, but then you have child-parent approaches which focus first or primarily on the child, but are sort of moving toward a two-generation approach and also include some services and opportunities for the parents. And then similarly, you have a parent-child approach, which focuses first or primarily on the parents, but again is moving toward a two-generation approach and also includes some services and opportunities for children. And then you have sort of smack dab in the middle there, whole family approaches, which really focus equally and intentionally on services and opportunities for the parent and the child. And I kind of like to think about this in sort of three kind of tiers. The first being assessment of the family as a unit, right? I mean, you have to do that first to really be able to provide simultaneous services and supports. That being said, I mean, in human services, sometimes that does happen by sort of happenstance, that you're providing services to both the child and the parent. But really, if you're taking a two-generation approach and you're being intentional about it, then the first step there really is to assess the family as a unit, as a whole. And then that second tier then is to provide simultaneous services and supports resulting from that assessment. And then the third sort of gold standard tier is really about intentionally pursuing better outcomes for both parents and their children. So where you are really holding yourself accountable for outcomes for both the child and the parent. That's how you get sort of smack dab in the middle of the continuum. And so, if you are an employment program and you're providing some services for the children, but you're really only holding yourself accountable to that employment outcome, to, parent-focused type outcomes, then you're not smack dab in the middle of the continuum. And similarly, if you're an early childhood program and you're providing some referrals for parents to other services, again, that's certainly on the continuum, but if you're not holding yourself accountable to those parent outcomes, and really your focus is still on child outcomes, then again, you're not right in the middle there. And I don't say that to say that at the Department of Human Services, we know how that looks like, exactly and perfectly across all of our programs. Certainly all of our programs are also at different points along this continuum. But again, part of my job is to really help them to think about how they can get closer to the middle. So one of the things we wanted to do is you have on your table, or you should have little sort of individual pieces of paper that have this continuum on it. What we'd like to do to kind of just facilitate a little bit of introduction and then some information gathering is to kind of have you all introduce yourselves to each other if you don't know each other already at your table. And then take a moment on the continuum to think about the program that you work with. If you don't work with a specific program, you could use, think of a program that you're familiar with that you would want to use as your example. And just write that program on the top there so we know what program you're referring to. And just think a little bit about where you might fall on that continuum. Make a mark where you might fall, write some notes on it about, again, why you think you fall at that part of the continuum, and just take a few moments to really think about that. So again, introduce yourselves first, take a moment to think about that for your program, write it on there. Certainly if you're struggling with where you're at on the continuum, ask your colleagues for help, and we'll take probably about 10 minutes for you to just do that. Any kind of aha moments from the discussion? Okay, well, for the people that kind of came in during the small group discussion there, feel free to also, at some point in time, go ahead and take one of those little sheets of paper. Again, what people were doing was sort of putting themselves or their program, the policy they work on, whatever makes sense for you, kind of on the continuum. Make sure you put what program or policy you're referring to on that. And then if you guys don't mind just leaving those on the table, we'll pick those up afterwards.
I'll actually jump in.
Sure.
So I'm with the Civic Canopy. We're the facilitating backbone organization for the Early Childhood Colorado Partnership, which is the statewide network supporting progress and possibilities today. And I was thinking about it from the lens of the network, the partnership network. And the ideal is that the network would be right in the middle, that whole family focus. It's a cross-sector network, broad network of 450 people now, almost 500 people across the state are on our listserv. And the idea would be that we're whole family focused, but the reality, as I think about it, is that a lot more people on the network are on the child focused side than it should be. And so part of what I was hoping to kind of gather from today, and what I'm thinking about as kind of the coordinator and supporter for this network, is how the network can think about bringing in more parent-focused partners, and what partners are those, and who are we missing at this table. So that's kind of what's running through my head right now.
How many of you work specifically in child-focused programs, early childhood, or the policy areas, or just whatever work you do is pretty, early childhood, child-focused? how many people come from sort of the other realm of like more adult focus, maybe economic security or employment, so, you know, adult education, those kinds of pieces. Anybody from that world? Okay, great. So as I mentioned earlier, I kind of wanted to provide sort of a brief history of the two-generation approach. Again, as I alluded to earlier, the idea that the needs of vulnerable parents and children can be tackled together is not necessarily a new idea. The concept was really explicitly introduced with the launch of Head Start in 1965, and then the Foundation for Child Development actually coined the term two-generation program in the early 1990s. And so initially, innovation in this area really involved two different strategies, and one of those was embedding economic security programs for parents into early childhood education programs, and then also adding childcare to education and employment services for parents. So in that first strategy, the economic security services that were linked to early childhood programs included things like adult basic education, GED attainment, strategies to obtain entry-level jobs, and to leave welfare. And in general, the adult programs in these more child-oriented settings weren't particularly intensive, they weren't very widely implemented, or extensively studied. Instead, most services for parents in early childhood education programs in the 80s and the 90s emphasized family support, parenting, literacy, mental health, access to public benefits, but all of these things were really seen as more closely aligned with early childhood programs' primary mission of achieving positive development for children. So again, sort of the intentional outcome there was still really focused around child development outcomes, even though they were providing some of these other more parent-focused services. And then in the second strategy that started with parents, it was primarily adolescent mothers on welfare. That was really the target group with this kind of approach or this strategy. Their chief goal was to really promote life skills, high school graduation or GED attainment, employment, and really reductions in long-term welfare dependency. But again, the elements of these programs that really directly targeted children were undeveloped, they were underused, and they often involved childcare of unknown quality, which I think you'll see that sort of in this new wave of programs, we really have a new sort of renewed recognition of the importance of quality early childhood care. So the issues really with these initial set of strategies was first that these large-scale demonstration programs for adolescent mothers, the results from those were pretty disappointing. There was some short-term benefits, but not really any sort of long-term results. In that time period, late 80s, early 90s, work-first policies really had come to dominate the conversation. Welfare reform was underway. The 1996 Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act mandated that recipients work, gave fewer education and training options, they set time limits, and sanctions for not following the rules. Federally funded job training programs for low-income adults shrank significantly. The 1998 Workforce Investment Act primarily supported job search and placement programs rather than training and education. And then there's the context that I spoke of a little bit earlier, with this sort of advancing technology and globalization, that many jobs in the US started to require increasingly higher levels of education and training than in the past. And sort of low-skilled jobs that paid enough to support a family started to largely disappear. So that kind of brings us to, again, this sort of second wave of programs that you might kind of call Generation 2.0. Which really has a renewed and explicit focus on low-income parents and children in the same program. So it really considers the full range of low-income families, not just those who are on welfare, and not just adolescent mothers on welfare. And as programs unfold, the people who are designing these programs are really giving considerable thought to which subgroups are most likely to succeed, how they should be targeted, how they should be approached. So more of this sort of individualized, type of program design than sort of a cookie-cutter, one-size-fits-all kind of approach. It really recognizes, as I mentioned earlier, the compelling evidence that high-quality early childhood education centers can have significant short and long-term benefits for children. And so those centers have really become an essential building block for new two-generation programs. The kind of new wave of programming is capitalizing on new directions in job training that really go beyond just search and placement, but really include education and training and sectoral career pathways, so healthcare, IT, manufacturing, those kinds of career pathways models as well. And then it really combines programs for adults and children that have previously been kept in separate silos. That's, again, sort of the way that this new set of programs is kind of moving. So these are what are considered the components of the core components of a two-generation approach. And again, this is another great visual from Ascended the Aspen Institute. I think that as this has developed, they probably, or evolved, they would probably now say that they would make all of these cogs a similar size. The research still shows that programs and policies are most successful when families have access to three things, and that's quality education, economic supports, and social capital. And so I think that's in part why those cogs were somewhat bigger on this initial visual. But that being said, certainly over just the few years that I've been doing this work and that they've been in existence, I think that they've come to understand the importance of health and well-being and what a large piece that is, and also probably that social capital is something that really permeates all of the other pieces. So I don't know that it's a separate cog. It's really something that you find in all of those other areas. But just to talk about some of these buckets a little more specifically around quality education. So that we're talking about, post-secondary education for adults, workforce development, early childhood education. Again, as I mentioned earlier, parents' level of educational attainment is a strong predictor of children's educational and economic outcomes in the United States. So in that bucket, we're looking to do things like increase literacy skills for both children and parents, provide student parents early childhood and other supports, link early childhood development programs and higher education, utilize schools as hubs for delivering child and family services. There's this kind of new movement going on called the community school, in which human services type programs are embedded in a public school system. In the economic supports bucket, we're talking about housing, transportation, financial education and asset building, tax credits, child care subsidies, student financial aid, Pell Grants, health insurance, Medicaid, food assistance, SNAP, all of those things. An increased family income during early childhood can have a profound and long-lasting impact on children's lives. And a growing proportion of young children are living in families that are stressed by food insecurity or household budgets that are disproportionately going to the cost of housing. So here we're talking about building financial education and family assets. We're talking about protecting family economic gains through continuity and bundling of supports. So protecting promotions and wage gains through mitigating the cliff effect and providing longer transition periods for families that experience a gain in wages or promotion. Building education and social capital throughout housing transitions. That's all part of that economic supports bucket. And then lastly, the social capital piece. Social capital really being the network of people and institutions upon which a family can rely. That's a critical contributor to the well-being of children and their parents, just as it's been a critical contributor to all of us, right? And so we're talking about peer support, family, friends, and neighbors, community and faith-based organizations, school and workplace contacts, leadership and empowerment programs, case managers, career coaches, cohort models, learning communities, all of those things. And so again, aimed at developing strong parent-child relationships early on, building family life skills, and supporting parent engagement in early childhood through those social networks. The evidence shows, which is probably not a surprise to you all, but that mothers who've used childcare benefit from the advice of other mothers that they encounter. And as a result, they're actually able to navigate hardships more effectively and more efficiently access resources such as economic supports. Because again, that social network builds their kind of family life skills. So approaches, overall that serve children and their families together, they recognize that every member of the family has a role in achieving economic security, and if we design programs and policies with the whole family's educational and economic future in mind, and help them access the social networks that they need to really make it in life, then opportunity becomes more of a family tradition. So I'm going to skip through this slide really quickly just for time purposes, but this kind of just gives you a sense of sort of what the old thinking was and what were sort of the new thinking. My contact information is in here and then also on the handout that you have, so if you want a copy of the slides at all, please feel free to contact me and I can provide those to you.
And we'll make sure to email the set of slides to everybody afterwards too,
So the other thing that we did sort of for time purposes, a lot of times I talk about sort of what we are doing at the state in those different sort of buckets. Again, for time purposes, we decided to kind of put that all in a handout for you. So you should have picked up one of these when you came in. And so this just gives you kind of an overview again of kind of what we've been doing at the Department of Human Services in this area. It shows you at the top what our kind of priority areas have been, and they've really been focused around employment, particularly for non-custodial parents. Also focused on economic supports and wealth building, and then also focused on early childhood education. So in the employment section, you'll see again some examples of some programs, a couple of which are really specified to non-custodial parents. You'll see also some information about a new pilot program that we're hoping to launch in November, a children's savings account pilot program that's also been a priority. And then I'm sure many of you are familiar with sort of the work in early childhood in our office, Colorado Shines, the PDIS, and the legislation from last session on CCAP as well. And then kind of covering all these areas was the launch of the universal application, which added some early childhood programs like early intervention and CCAP to the existing PEAK system, which has all of your economic benefit type programs on it as well. And so then on the back of that is, I said at the Aspen Institute, they put out a document not too long ago called the Top 10 for 2Gen. And this was really their list of the top 10 policies to promote two-generation strategies. So that just gives you a sense of sort of where the field is going. The ones that I bolded, I think, are the ones that we as an administration at the Department of Human Services will really be trying to push forth in the next few years. So again, the front side kind of shows you what we have been doing and what our priorities are, and the back side shows you kind of where we're going. So really trying to better integrate our economic security into home visiting programs, looking at our TANF program, Colorado Works, and how we redesign that for the 21st century, and then really how we integrate the behavioral health system into the economic security system, into the early childhood system, into children, youth, and families as well, how we better utilize that system as well.
Keri, is this on the website that it could be easily shared?
So it is not. We don't have a two-generation page on the website yet. I'm working on that. But I can, Hannah has it.
And we, there's a Padlet page for the meeting
Oh,
today.
yeah.
Well, so when we do the follow-up email with everybody, I'll make sure to include the PowerPoint in our Padlet page where we usually just put all the resources, and I'll make sure everybody has that.
Right, because this top 10, I know of a couple of groups that need this.
Yeah, it's actually also, the full document is actually on the Ascend website. So their website is in the PowerPoint as well, so you can get the full document on their website. So, Hannah, you're going to have to help me here. One thing I did want to do, however, is just give a little, example. You know, today's gathering workshop is really focused on knowledge building and providing you all with a lot of knowledge. And the part 2 is really about how you apply that knowledge. But we kind of wanted to tease it a little bit with sort of an example of a two-generation program. And this is our Colorado Parent Employment Program. And this is referenced on your handout, but this is a program that's focused on non-custodial parents. And it's in 5 counties right now: Jefferson, El Paso, Arapahoe, Boulder, and Powers County. And if you are a non-custodial parent who has a current child support order but you're unable to pay because you're underemployed or unemployed, but you're willing to pay, you're willing to work, you want to have a relationship with your child, then you go into one of these county child support agencies and you are eligible for the program. You are then randomly assigned to receive either traditional services as usual or an enhanced set of services because we're part of a larger federal demonstration project, so it has this very rigorous evaluation with it. But that's a 5-year project. And if you're assigned to the enhanced services group, then you receive intensive case management. You receive some enhanced child support services, so you might get arrears forgiveness, a modification of order, you might get your license reinstated. You would also receive a 16-hour nurturing parent curriculum that also involves a peer support model with it, and then also intensive employment services. And so last summer we commissioned a documentary that was done on the program. The full documentary is about 20-25 minutes. It's pretty powerful, but hopefully this clip will just kind of show you the power of the peer support model and that social capital. And really, why we think of this as a 2-generation program is because, we're not only focused on the employment outcomes for adults, but really changing the outcomes for the child through the improved relationship with that non-custodial parent and the improved relationship with the entire family, including the custodial parent. That's not as evident in this particular clip, but in the actual full documentary, you see a couple of the ex-wives and custodial parents are interviewed as well, and so you really get that sense as well. So, just a quick clip for you. That was commissioned last year to examine public support for 2-generation approaches versus programs that are targeted to just parents or to just children. And so this was done last September. It was a national survey of about 1,000 adults over the age of 18 nationwide in the continental United States. And as might not be surprising to you, Americans overwhelmingly believe that a 2-generation approach is most effective when compared to, again, approaches that are just aimed at children or just aimed at parents. And then, again, I'll let you kind of read that on your own, sort of the other specific responses to some of the individual questions that were on the survey. And then again, when it goes out, I'll look at that more closely as well. But kind of just wanted to leave you there with that information. My contact information is also on the next slide. So again, you'll have that as well. It's also on the handout. And then if you want more resources on the 2-gen approach, Ascend to the Aspen Institute is a great website. Again, that top 10 for 2-gen document, the full document, can be found at that Ascend to the Aspen Institute website as well. And I'm done for now. Thank you.